Hello, and thank you so much for joining us today for Baha'i Chat. My name is Faith Holmes, and this is Masud Olufani, and we are your co-hosts today. Thank you so much for joining us for a lively and heartfelt conversation on Abdu'l-Bahá's life and his journey here in America, that luminous journey. We are a conversation series dedicated to our interconnectedness, to our oneness. And we have made a commitment here at Baha'i Chat to make sure that we address America's most vital and challenging issue, that being racism in America. And we are having a conversation today about how Abdu'l-Bahá did that in his journeys throughout America. Baha'i Chat is a moment where we take a pause from the world and we address the world's ills through a spiritual lens. It's rooted in the Baha'i writings and the fundamental teachings of the oneness of God, the oneness of religion, and the oneness of all mankind. As you may or may not know, there are no clergy in the Baha'i faith, and one of the main principles is the independent investigation of truth. If you are not already in contact with Baha'is and would like to be, please email us at info@baha'i.chat and just simply put guide in the subject line, and we'll be sure to introduce you to someone so that you have accompaniment if you'd like to find out more information on the Baha'i faith. One of the things that Bahá'u'lláh, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, made very clear is that it is not possible in the world to have unity without first having justice. And we live in a world today where we like to talk a lot about unity. We all want it, right? That's just something that all of us would like to have. But I think many of us skip a really important step because it's not possible, we are told by Bahá'u'lláh, to have unity without justice. I'd like to share two quotes with you. No light can compare with the light of justice. The establishment of order in the world and the tranquility of the nations depend upon it. Baha'u'lláh says the tranquility of the world and the nations depend upon it. In another quote, he goes on to say, the light of men is justice. Quench it not with the contrary winds of oppression and tyranny. The purpose of justice is the appearance of unity among man. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Masud.
Thank you, Faith, so much. It's such an honor to be in this space with you. And I think this is our first time co-hosting together. So this is big. I'm gonna have to mark this down on the calendar. Welcome, everybody. My name is Masud Olufani. I'm so happy to be in this space to talk about this remarkable film that Anne and Tim have put together. Really extraordinary. And to kind of set that up, I'm going to give you just a brief introduction of the faith, and then we're going to move forward with the program. When I think about the Baha'i faith, and I've been a Baha'i now since 1992, the main thing, the word that comes immediately to my mind is oneness. There are many principles in the Baha'i faith: the equality of women and men, the harmony of science and religion, universal education for everybody on the planet, independent investigation of the truth, and the oneness of the world's religions. But that core principle of the oneness of humanity, which is not theory in the Baha'i context or intellectual exercise, but actually is reality, is an expression of the way in which the world and all things that live upon it and within it have been created. So that's the core principle of the faith. The religion, of course, starts in 1863 with the declaration of Baha'u'lláh in the Garden of Rizwan. Baha'u'lláh, who Baha'is refer to as the glory of God, the latest in a long line of prophets and messengers from God that extend throughout human history to move us to a new level of maturity and awareness in our spiritual and material reality. Abdu'l-Bahá, who's the focus of this film, is one of the central figures of the faith. He is the physical and the spiritual son of Baha'u'lláh, the prophet founder of the faith. He is who Baha'is refer to as the master, the perfect exemplar of all of the Baha'i teachings, the one to whom we turn to when there's questions about what to do or how to act as a Baha'i in the world. And we look to his example for guidance in matters of justice, in matters of equality, in matters of equanimity, love, compassion, and fidelity. You know, there's so many powerful quotes about Abdu'l-Bahá. One of the ones that immediately comes to mind is from a man called W.E.B. Du Bois. Du Bois, of course, was a member of the Talented Tenth, the Black intelligentsia of the early 1900s, those who kind of were the bedrock or the foundation of the philosophical push of the Harlem Renaissance, which of course, you know, was incorporated the arts as well as intellectual exercises. And Du Bois is one of the founding members of that intelligentsia. Du Bois also, we know, is a graduate of Harvard University, one of the foremost thinkers on race relations in the 20th century. And he once referred to Abdu'l-Bahá. He talked about this notion of oneness and racial equality. And he talked about the calm, sweet universalism of Abdu'l-Bahá. That's such a beautiful phrase, the calm, sweet universalism of Abdu'l-Bahá. It kind of has a jazz ring to it for me. Really, really beautiful. And, but we know for Abdu'l-Bahá and for the Baha'i community at large, in regards to the teachings of Bahá'u'lláh, this is not a Pollyannish view of oneness and equality. There is no sentimentalism when it comes to this notion of oneness. This is a reality. The reality of oneness has to be realized in practice, right? Through the hard and difficult work of making that spiritual principle real for every member of the human family. And that's what we as the Baha'i world community are engaged in on a day-to-day basis. In regards to this, Abdu'l-Bahá has this powerful quote that he says, "Until these prejudices are entirely removed from the people of the world," he wrote, "the realm of humanity will not find rest. Nay, rather discord and bloodshed will be increased day by day, and the foundation of the prosperity of the world of man will be destroyed. Now is the time for the Americans to take up this matter and unite both the white and colored races. Otherwise, hasten ye towards destruction. Hasten ye towards devastation. Indeed, there is a greater danger than only the shedding of blood. It is the destruction of America." And now today, of course, we see kind of America falling into a very difficult place in regards to the issue of race and the other challenges that have afflicted the body politic for so many years. Baha'is believe that the faith of Baha'u'lláh stands as a powerful answering call to the limitations and the vicissitudes that face the human family. And we believe that the key to unlocking the full potential of the human family rests in the revelation of Baha'u'lláh. With that being said, friends, we're now going to move to introducing our esteemed guests, both Anne and Tim Perry. And I get the honor and the pleasure of introducing Anne. So she is the better looking half of this team, although I love Tim. But and, you know, the beautiful thing about this is when I get an opportunity to, you know, to be in spaces like this with friends who I know, you know, either, you know, in passing or just got to know a little bit, I get to read about the amazing things they've done. And Anne is just a powerful example of someone who has utilized her life in service to humanity through the arts, which is very important to me. She's an extraordinarily committed person in drama, dance, writing, and various other iterations of artistic expression. This woman has, she is degreed up to yin yang, all the way up here, right? She has 2 master's degrees. She has a PhD in aesthetics. I know she doesn't want to foreground that, but just to let you friends know that she has really committed her time and her energy to her craft and her discipline. She has worked for Baha'i Publishing Trust and also spent some time at Baha'i Media Services. She has published this amazing book called Greenacre on the Piscata, how do you say that? Piscataqua. Short stories, poems, essays on arts. Man, I stumbled through that, but we got through it. And she also has taught college, writing in humanities, film appreciation, art appreciation, And check this out, man. She comes from a long line of civil rights workers, man, and freedom fighters. I mean, her parents marched with Dr. King, who was one of my greatest heroes and pretty much the most distinguished graduate of my alma mater, Morehouse College. So she comes with deep cred, you know, spiritually, morally, intellectually. So I give props up to Ann. I'm so glad to have you here. Love you, sister. So glad that you have been participating in this process. I'm gonna turn it over to my sister Faith for the introduction on Brother Tim.
Thank you. Way to work in that alma mater there. I have the distinct pleasure and honor of introducing Tim Perry. He found the faith at 19 in the desert of Arizona and Lake Havasu City after a period of searching for truth. He lived in Los Angeles area for over 20 years and then moved to Texas for love. The love of Ann, not Texas. They met at Media Services, and he has a career in media, including projects with NBC, Universal Studios, Disney, KISS, and multiple other corporate clients. As a producer, director, editor, and cinematographer, he has also been able to offer his service to the faith from time to time. And we're going to get to see a beautiful representation of that here today. He has produced 3 short films for the World Congress in 1992. One of them was about Abdu'l-Bahá. And he's directed the Spiritual Revolution to series filmed at the San Francisco Baha'i Center. He shot a documentary for the U.S. Baha'i Media Services Department at the Terraces dedication in Israel in 2001. Wow, how wonderful to have been a part of that process. And I know I saw that film, so thank you so much for that incredible work. It was really moving. He's created several videos playing at the World Center and at the Baha'i House of Worship, and he currently freelances for Media Services, shooting and editing for the Rich Tapestry Project. But really, what we're here to talk about here today is their incredible journey of the life of Abdu'l-Bahá and this 3-hour documentary that they've created on his travels here in the United States. So with that, we'd like to get started with an introductory to A Luminous Journey.
In 1912, on the day the Titanic left England, a remarkable man of advanced age arrived in North America from the East. Born in Persia, exiled in his youth, and imprisoned for 40 years for his beliefs, he came bearing a message of universal peace, and from April 11th to December 5th, 1912, he gave over 400 talks to a combined audience of an estimated 93,000 people. As he traveled across the nation from coast to coast, he astonished those he met with his extraordinary knowledge and perceptions. He spoke on race unity, gender equality, and social justice. His followers considered him a perfect exemplar of the faith he represented. They called him the Master and the Mystery of God. The merest glimpse of his majestic presence and sagacity is all that can be conveyed in any record of his luminous journey to these shores. Abdu'l-Bahá entered this compelling scene as the leader of an emerging independent religion. Born in Persia in 1844, he was given the name Abbas Effendi, yet preferred to be known as Abdu'l-Bahá, servant of glory. He was the son of Bahá'u'lláh, the revealer of a new universal religion, the Baha'i faith. Abdu'l-Bahá was the first to recognize the spiritual station of his father, and thus the first Baha'i. In 1892, Bahá'u'lláh passed away. It was in his will and testament that Bahá'u'lláh appointed Abdu'l-Bahá as his successor. He called Abdu'l-Bahá the center of his covenant. This covenant with his followers was to assure that power struggles would not mar the goal of unity among the believers. It would safeguard the Baha'i faith from splitting into divisions. After 40 years of confinement in the prison city of Akka, he was liberated in 1908 by the Young Turk Revolution. Despite the exile and imprisonment of its leaders, the Baha'i faith had already spread to the West. American Baha'is, such as the philanthropist Phoebe Hearst, made the arduous journey to the Holy Land to see him. Others waited eagerly for his visit to America. News of his freedom prompted followers around the world to urge him to visit their countries. Americans invited him to sail to their shores aboard the new luxury liner, the Titanic. Abdu'l-Bahá returned the money offered for his trip and chose to board the more modest ship, the SS Cedric, which sailed from Egypt on March 25th.
Wow. Really so moving and so incredible. Tell us, what inspired you to create this masterpiece?
Thanks. First of all, we're really happy to be here. For me, the inspiration came probably in 2000. And I mean, we've been thinking about it for a long time, creating a story of Abdu'l-Bahā's travels to the United States, telling that, chronicling it. We knew that there were many places that were still here, homes and buildings, and that we could go out and we could film, and so we then, with the approach of the anniversary of his coming to America, he came in 1912, and we knew that there was a great centenary planned in 2012. It inspired us to kind of move forward and to go ahead and start filming and see if we could begin to tell a fraction of the story of what his visit was about here. And also for me personally, it was for me it was a part of American history. You know, we're not taught things like this in school, but I think in the future, his contribution to the fabric of our nation and to the psyche of our nation, I think, will become more apparent. And so I wanted to share this little chapter of American history. So that was why I was inspired to work on the film.
I think we also wanted to do something that combined both of our interests and talents, as we're often working on separate projects, and Tim's usually are more commercial and mine more educational. But a personal story for me is that a few years before we made the film, I was reading the marriage prayer that talks about how marriage could produce coral and pearls. And we hadn't had children together, but I said to him one day, well, we need to work on our coral and pearls. And Tim said, well, you do the coral, I'll do the pearls. And I said, no, that's not what it means. So this project essentially became our coral and pearls because we were both equally invested in doing it. And we could not have done it without each other. And it took several years, and it was hard work. And, you know, later we thought, well, if we had known how hard it would be, how long it would take, and how much it would cost, we would never have started it. But luckily, we didn't know any of those things. And so we were very committed to creating it and to finishing it. And we wanted to highlight some important themes of his journey in America. Race unity was certainly among the most primary themes. And we're learning in France, he talked a lot about materialism versus spirituality. And in England, about peace and war. And so in writing the script and in learning the stories, we've gained such a deep appreciation for Abdu'l-Bahá and his role in bringing the pure teachings of the faith to the West and trying to make alive the story.
And for those of you who would like to watch this film, it can be found on YouTube and you can watch it. So we'll tell people how to see it both at the beginning and at the end. But how do people see it currently on YouTube? Is there an actual site to go to? I know I've seen it where it's broken up into two parts, and then there's another place where it's broken up into chapters.
Yeah, we created an official YouTube channel for Luminous Journey. If you go to YouTube and look up Luminous Journey, you probably will land on the right one. It will say official, and we did want to make it available to anyone. And there's also a Persian language version of it because we created that version as well. And now there's we will be putting up an Italian language version, and as translations happen and more versions, we will try to provide them on YouTube. So
wow, I think we have a second clip coming up that we're going to see, and I have a question I would like to ask Tim and Ann on the other side of this clip.
1912 in America. A land of optimism and vitality. Immigrants flocked to its welcoming shores in search of a better life. The United States was still expanding, with stars for new states, Arizona and New Mexico, added to its flag. People everywhere were dancing American dances, listening to American music, and wearing American fashions. The first eastbound transcontinental flight was made. Columbia University established the Pulitzer Prize for Journalists. Universal Pictures became incorporated as the nation's first movie studio. Oliver Twist became America's first feature-length film. A woman named Juliette Gordon Low made news when she founded the organization that became known as the Girl Scouts of America. The 5th Olympic Summer Games were held in Sweden, with Americans winning the most gold medals. The Boston Red Sox defeated New York during the World Series of 1912. Some of the games took place in Fenway Park, which opened earlier that year. 3,000 cherry trees were given by Japan to Washington, D.C. to symbolize optimism and friendship. But there were problems as well. Undernourished and unhealthy, children worked long hours in mills and mines. Racial laws and segregation reflected deeply embedded prejudice. Women could not yet vote, a controversial issue. Labor unions rose in response to increasing poverty and the growing gap between rich and poor. It was an election year. Politics had become almost unthinkably divisive, fragmenting the Republican Party and leading to the election of a Democratic president. Religion in America was increasingly diverse, reflecting the beliefs of waves of new immigrants. Conservative Protestants vehemently disagreed on points of doctrine, while liberal thinkers explored alternative beliefs, including the appealing philosophies of Hindu and Buddhist sages, such as Swami Vivekananda and Dharmapala.
Wow, you know, it's really, I'm thinking about watching that segment of the video, and I've been thinking prior to our convening today. You know, Abdu'l-Bahá arrives in 1912. We know that less than a decade after his arrival, despite his appeals to the conscience of America to address the issue of race, we know that in 1919 you have the Red Summer, which is violence visited upon Black communities across the nation in the form of lynchings, in the form of burning down communities, the dispossession of lands, all of these things taking place. And I was thinking about, you know, Abdu'l-Bahá's time here and how, in some sense, you know, his demonstrating, you know, not just through rhetoric, not just through words, but actually through his behavior, the importance of establishing as the way of being this oneness of humanity, where everybody has a seat at the table, right? And we know this is embodied in that famous dinner party that took place in Washington, D.C., right? Where we have, a number of esteemed guests at this very illustrious home in a wealthy area in Washington, D.C. And a member of the talented 10th, a man named G Gregory, who is an attorney, who was trained at Howard University in Washington, D.C., shows up at the home, but he stays in the anterior room and will not come into the dining room. And of course, this is in response to the social mores and the laws, imposing segregation, on the American population. And what does Abdu'l-Bahá do when he notices that G Gregory is not present among the gathering? He uses that as kind of a clarion call to all humanity and says, "Where is Mr. Gregory?" And says, "Bring him in here," and places him in a seat of honor. What an extraordinary example for not only those gathered, those Baha'is gathered, many of whom who were still practicing, right, the segregation laws and who had their own kind of own racial awakening that needed to take place in terms of oneness and equality. And Abdu'l-Bahá is essentially saying in this revelation, we are all one human family and everybody has a seat at the table. And I was thinking about how that in many ways, that is kind of like, it exemplifies this musical tradition in the Black community called call and response, where Abdu'l-Bahá, by saying that G Gregory had a seat at this table, calling him to a seat of honor, is making a call not only to those gathered, but into the future. And he's waiting for us to respond to the question of equality and oneness and racial justice. And I'm thinking about this, and I'm reflecting on what a large part of his life was doing this work, of Abdu'l-Bahá, of bringing about the examples and the reality of our shared oneness. And I'm wondering what you learned in this process while you're making this film about his social activism, generally speaking, but specifically about what the guardian of the Baha'i faith calls America's most vital and challenging issue, the eradication of racial prejudice.
Well, there's so much, and certainly he calls us to welcome the stranger, to befriend all, to raise the fallen, to uplift the poor, to teach the ignorant. And essentially, he teaches us how to love without exception and to go beyond our comfort level in terms of relating to others. He shows us how to see the beauty and the capacity of people, not just their struggles and their lacks. And there's a great story of how Abdu'l-Bahá holds up a piece of dark chocolate to the face of an African-American boy in the midst of some white children to show them a visual symbol of the boy's worth and his sweetness, for instance. So everywhere he went, he acted in a way that demonstrated freedom from prejudice and love and acceptance for all. He instructed the DC community, for instance, to integrate their meetings beginning in 1910 before he came, and making Washington, D.C. the first racially integrated Baha'i community in America. And he asked Agnes Parsons, who was a prominent D.C. socialite, to plan America's first race amity conference in 1921. And he sent a message to this convention. He said, "Say to this convention that never since the beginning of time has one more important been held. This convention stands for the oneness of humanity." So it was not a vague hope. He really meant this message in a large sense.
I just recently learned more about the Race Amity Conference. We have the National Center for Race Amity organization that has sprung out from this original conference and is trying to continue the work and raise the awareness of race amity and that movement, which is different than the civil rights movement. Race amity is the coming together of people of different races and colors to move ideas forward. We recently came across a little tidbit, which I didn't realize, which I thought was very cool. James Weldon Johnson, who wrote the words for "Lift Every Voice and Sing," he wrote that for the first Race Amity Conference. he wanted, it was performed at the first race Amity conference, and I think the music was John Rosen Johnson, who wrote the music, and this was later then adopted as the Black national anthem. And so the influence of Abdu'l-Bahá in ways that we have no idea even to this day how they've rippled out into America. That demonstrates just one of those little moments where, by calling this conference into being, this man was inspired to create what is now has been adopted as the Black national anthem.
And we found all sorts of correlations with various stories and how we shot the film. For instance, just last night, I read that after dictating a tablet to a believer in America about race unity, Louis Gregory recalled that Abdu'l-Bahá took a vessel containing blackberries and gave some of these to each of the friends present. Well, in our film scene about Louis Gregory, we used blackberries to suggest racial diversity. And this, which I didn't know this other story till last night, a confirmation though that some of our intuitive aesthetic choices aligned with symbolic or actual elements of the story.
What I really love and what I really want to uplift and foreground is, I think, by you all making this film and committing your talents and your imagination, you are responding to that timeless call by Abdu'l-Bahá in a very profound and deeply moving way. And I can just sense Abdu'l-Bahá smiling.
Yeah.
And not because the film is about him. Of course, we know that he wasn't invested in personality, but because of the principles and the virtues that the film centers and foregrounds, and because that call of oneness and unity has been answered in a productive, a constructive, a loving, and a unity-inspiring way.
Louis G. Gregory, an African-American lawyer and descendant of slaves, became a Baha'i in Washington in 1909. Abdu'l-Bahá encouraged him to
become the means whereby the white and colored people close their eyes to racial differences and behold the reality of humanity.
Gregory facilitated integrated meetings, though some opposed. In 1911, he went on pilgrimage to Akka, and Abdu'l-Bahá encouraged him to confront racial divisions with love and patience. In Washington, D.C., Gregory arranged for him to speak at African-American venues. He addressed the Bethel Literary and Historical Society at the Metropolitan African Methodist Episcopal Church to a large mixed-race audience. At Rankin Chapel of Howard University, America's premier Black university, Abdu'l-Bahá proclaimed to over 1,600 faculty and students how the oneness of humanity transcends race.
Today I am most happy, for I see here a gathering of the servants of God. I see white and black sitting together. There are no whites and blacks before God. Strive jointly to make extraordinary progress and mix together completely.
He gave the diverse audience a new vision concerning the possibilities for unity and the advancement for people of color. Abdu'l-Bahá then went to the Persian legation for a luncheon with some people prominent in the social and political life of Washington. Beforehand, Abdu'l-Bahá asked Louis Gregory to meet with him at the legation, prolonging their talk until luncheon was announced. Washington was a thoroughly segregated city, where African Americans and whites did not dine together. When Abdu'l-Bahá led the guests to the dining room, Gregory stayed behind, planning to slip away quietly. Abdu'l-Bahá arranged the place of honor at his right for the African American lawyer, and then Khan hurried off to retrieve Gregory before he left the building. Once everyone had been seated, Abdu'l-Bahá rose, stated he was very pleased to have Mr. Gregory there, and then, as if nothing unusual had happened, spoke on the oneness of humankind. Gregory himself later wrote that
Abdu'l-Bahá made everyone feel perfectly at ease by his genial humor, wisdom, and outpouring of love.
Accompanying Abdu'l-Bahá in his travels was British Baha'i Louisa Matthew, She and Louis Gregory had become friends while on pilgrimage the previous year. Louisa tells how Abdu'l-Bahá gave her a white flower and told her to give it to Louis Gregory.
By looking at me in a peculiar way, he conveyed his meaning to me that he wished me to marry Mr. Gregory.
The Gregorys married and shared many years together. Washington Baha'i Pauline Hannon, though first shy with Black Americans, taught her washerwoman the faith. Then bravely, she and Joseph, her husband, held integrated meetings and became proponents of racial integration. At an interracial gathering at Joseph and Pauline Hannon's, he expressed joy at seeing the races together.
It is evident that excellence does not depend upon color. Character is the true criterion of humanity.
The Chicago Defender, the most influential African-American paper in the United States, printed a glowing report of Abdu'l-Bahá's impact on the integration of the Washington Baha'i community.
His visit to Washington has been a triumphal march. He was the guest of one of Washington's wealthiest women, one who moves in the most exclusive social circles at the Capitol. And yet her house has been thrown open to rich and poor and black and white. Southern people whose hearts were once filled with the most bitter prejudices have publicly acknowledged their change of heart.
Wow. You know, it's really interesting to me, the power of media, the power of film, because as we experience what it is that you created, it creates emotions in us. And it causes us to feel something deeply that maybe before we could only have a conceptual image of. And, you know, today in 2021, mixed race gatherings, we all know there's only one race, the human race, but for purposes of what we're talking about here today, are more normalized. But in 1912, this was not the case at all. And it was truly a revolutionary act. Like Abdu'l-Bahá really truly became the greatest social activist to show us how it is that we are to behave, how we are to act. So how did this issue of racial justice impact the making of this film?
Well, I think for one, he taught us to see differently. He said, "As I stand here tonight and look upon this assembly," he told one audience, "I'm reminded curiously of a beautiful bouquet of violets gathered together in varying colors, dark and light. And to others, when you observe many colored flowers, there is charm and display. The world of humanity too is like a garden, and humankind are like the many colored flowers." There's another quote as well. He says, "In the clustered jewels of the races, may the blacks be as sapphires and rubies, and the whites as diamonds and pearls. The composite beauty of humanity will be witnessed in their unity and blending." When he came to America, you know, he challenged America to go beyond tolerance, to embrace diversity completely, to see differently, to demolish social barriers, even in marriage. And he swept aside the social protocol of segregation by insisting that every place where he spoke be open to people of all races. So he was an amazing example of how to include everyone, black, white, male, female, rich, poor, and so on. He encouraged us to see that human transformation was possible, that societal conditions could change and evolution could occur. And sometimes, though, he told people not to expect too much change too quickly. He gave this vision of hope, but also kind of a practical path to achieving it.
There is another part of the story that we tell in about Abdu'l-Bahá's travels as he crosses the nation and goes to California, to Oakland, and then later to Los Angeles. And in the telling of the story in the Oakland area, what was interesting to me, because Abdu'l-Bahá was, you know, always sharing the idea of oneness and that was one of the main themes of his talks that he gave. And peace was another theme, but oneness is interwoven with peace. You can't have peace without oneness and without a realization of that we're all from the same human family. And he met, for example, at Helen Goodall's home, who was a wealthy California woman who hosted Abdu'l-Bahá, and he gave many talks in her home. Her butler, Kenichi Yamamoto, became the first Japanese American to become a Baha'i. And it was through Kenji Yamamoto that he was able to enable Abdu'l-Bahá to give a talk at the Japanese YMCA. And from then, the interest among the Japanese American community became very large, so that many of them came to his talks later on at the Goodall home and at other venues. So in a sense, that introduced the Japanese Americans, and which is also a kind of a timely issue as well these days. I mean, it's not black and white. It's not exclusively black and white. It's not, it's all the races. And he had a message and gave examples for all the races. He on his trip back from on his trip to across to California, he met a Japanese Baha'i, Sachiro Fujita, and who was climbed up a lamppost and was trying to get a view of Abdu'l-Bahá, and Abdu'l-Bahá called him down and asked him to come to Corinne True's home to accompany him there. And later, Mr. Fujita accompanied Abdu'l-Bahá all the way to California, and then later he served at the Baha'i World Center in Haifa. And some of us who are, and I didn't personally, but who are old enough to have gone on early pilgrimages, Mr. Fujita was still alive as the gardener for the World Center there, and he would love to visit and chat with the friends there. I just wanted to kind of throw out how he was talking to the Japanese American community as well.
I think Abdu'l-Bahá, when he took these stands for racial justice and inclusion, which were very demonstrable, right? He was very intentional about not only his words, but also his actions. And as we're engaged in this work in whatever way that we are in terms of creative responses to Abdu'l-Bahā's call, right, for racial justice, for equality, one of the things that I see in his actions is he was not invested in the comfort of those gathered in terms of dealing with the issue of race. There was a desire to, through his actions, to agitate in a way or create a space of dissonance so people could confront their own perhaps unresolved prejudices and racial biases. And I'm wondering, as you all were engaged in this work and this incredible film that you've created, how did that resonate for you? Was that something that you found that you found for yourself in doing the research? His willingness to kind of take those stands regardless of the social mores, and in that way, quietly doing it, not doing it with a whole lot of fanfare, not doing it with publicity, but just doing it almost with a kind of unconsciousness, right? Or that was so kind of like not performative, but just flowed from him, but nevertheless caused people to confront their unresolved issues. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about that.
Well, one story about France that we've been looking at recently is that a man of color came to see him at a hotel, and the hotel proprietor turned the man away. And Abdu'l-Bahá was distressed by this, and he rebukes the hotel man, and he says, "I did not come to see expensive hotels or furnishings, but to meet my friends. I did not come to Paris to conform to the customs of Paris, but to establish the standard of Bahá'u'lláh. So, and another story that I remember reading when I had been making all these costumes and glue gunning things on hats for several days. And I read this story about Abdu'l-Bahá coming to America, and some of the Westerners proposed that he discard his traditional dress and dress as a Westerner. And this was on the boat coming over, and he said, "Oh, these matters are just trifles." And there I had been working on costumes for 3 days, trifles, you know. So all along, we've gotten these messages about how he looked at things differently than how we typically do, and we need to adjust our vision a bit.
There's a quality about Abdu'l-Bahá that I think is so profound, was his ability to see, right? And I think everybody that entered his presence felt seen by him.
Yes.
And I think marginalized groups, people who have suffered under historic marginalization, dehumanization, objectification, are always looking for others to see us. Who will see us? And then having seen us, who will love us once they have seen us? And it reminds me of something The Guardian said, where he talks about they whose hearts have been warmed by the energizing influence of God's creative love, cherish his creatures for his sake, and recognize in every human face a sign of his reflected glory. And it seemed like Abdu'l-Bahá had this powerful ability, this penetrating insight, to be able to see our quality, to be able to see who we were. And people felt embraced and loved in his presence in that way.
Yeah, essentially, he said the color does not matter and that there's one human race. And he seemed to be the happiest when there was a mixed group around him. And he said that to God, skin color was of no importance. And it's only an adornment, a source of charm and diversity. And he said that only humans among all the creatures had made an issue of skin color, and it had become a cause of discord.
Not only did he teach us to look beyond that and see different, taught us, like even in the story that you shared about holding the chocolate up to the boy's face, he taught white boys looking upon that, like think about the sweetness of the chocolate that you eat, you know, so like he highlighted the nobility, the beauty, like, so it wasn't, you know, often, especially people who want to be socially just or want to be socially conscious will say things like, I don't even see color.
Yeah.
And that's very problematic, because what you're saying is you don't see, you know, a person for the beauty that God created them to be in the color that they are. So Abdu'l-Bahá's example was never one that didn't acknowledge the diversity of the beauty of the color, right? And so even though we have those quotes that sometimes I think sometimes people take out of context, not here, not you, you're highlighting it beautifully here, right? But that, you know, it is our diversity. It is those rubies and sapphires. It is those diamonds and pearls that makes the diversity of the human family so incredibly beautiful.
And I think the current time gives us all an opportunity to look deeper at the diversity, to see color more deeply, and understand how people's lives have been affected by the inheritance of prejudice that we all suffer from. You know, and not to trivialize it, to really try to empathize and understand to a much greater degree.
I thought you did something very masterfully in that clip about the second clip that was shown, America, or Abdu'l-Bahá 1912. You know, the fun music, the patriotism that people felt about America, and then the realities that immigrants and people of color faced in this country. And you really helped like bring that emotive response that like made us all feel like, oh, so hopeful. And then it was like, oh, wait a minute, that was only the case for some people living in America. And I think often we forget that fact, or I don't think we forget it. I think we're purposefully miseducated. And so I just really want to honor both of you for highlighting something that is so important for us to know and understand about our history, because it's only when we are truly like shown the true education that we can heal as a nation and that we can move forward.
And thank you, Faith. That's largely because Tim is so skillful as a filmmaker to be able to evoke those kind of emotions and to pick the right music and everything. So that's part of his great gift.
Thank you. Yeah, sometimes I bumble into stuff. So honestly, some things are accidental or maybe providential, who knows? Just sometimes we just like to make something impactful in ways, given the tools that we have. I've always likened it to cooking in a way that these are the ingredients that you have to work with. We had the stills and the things that we shot, and then now let's cook something up with it and make something tasty and delicious. And one thing that I do want to point out is that one of his major things that was demonstrated, not just when he was in America or traveling in Europe, in the West, but also when he was in Palestine as well, that he gave us the message of the nobility of the human being. All humans were created noble, and he demonstrated that many times by his caring and service and sacrifice to the people of needs, the poor. When he was here, he came and for example, at the Bowery mission in New York, he brought money and made sure that every person that was at the mission, some 200 men, had enough money to be able to have a room and a meal in the evening. And he did that throughout the United States. So I think the theme of his love for the poor and the nobility, even though we don't have means, even though our circumstances are the way they are, we're still noble as human beings and immigrants. And he visited the Hull House in Chicago, and again gave money to the immigrants that came to visit and to talk to him.
On April 28th, Abdu'l-Bahá left by train for Chicago. Like many other cities, Chicago was bitterly divided over racial issues. At Hull House, a settlement house for immigrants founded by Jane Addams, vice president of the National American Women's Suffrage Association and chairman of the Women's Peace Party, Abdu'l-Bahá addressed the issue of color to an overflow audience.
Shall this, the least of all distinctions, separate you as races and individuals? The various races of humankind lend a composite harmony and beauty of color to the whole. Let all associate, therefore, in this great human garden, even as flowers grow and blend together side by side.
After Abdu'l-Bahá's address, many immigrant children and unemployed men gathered around, and to each he gave some coins. From Hull House, he went to the 4th Annual Convention of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which earlier had been discussing lynchings and job discrimination. He asked the gathering,
"Can we say that man of a certain hue, white, black, brown, yellow, red, is the true image of his creator? We must conclude that color is of no importance. Man is not man simply because of bodily attributes. The standard of divine measure is his intelligence and spirit."
W.E.B. Du Bois, editor of the NAACP journal The Crisis, and one of the most influential African Americans in the country, published an account that noted,
1,000 disappointed people were unable to get in the hall to experience the calm, sweet universalism of Abdu'l-Bahá.
Du Bois featured Abdu'l-Bahá as Man of the Month in his journal, and a digest of Abdu'l-Bahá's Hull House and NAACP talks. Race unity continued as a theme throughout Abdu'l-Bahá's journey, and his talks attracted numerous African Americans to the Baha'i faith. Among them were Elaine Locke, a preeminent Black scholar and a founder of the Harlem Renaissance. Ida B. Wells, a leading activist in Chicago. And Robert Abbott, publisher of the Chicago Defender.
You know, one of the things that's so interesting to me, Faith, and maybe you've thought about this as well, is that Abdu'l-Bahá was doing these things decades before Rosa Parks decided not to give up her seat on a city bus in Montgomery, Alabama. So, you know, context of the Baha'i faith, I know there's, you know, Bahá'u'lláh talks about when a revelation enters, you know, the world of being, how it influences every atom in existence. And we see how Abdu'l-Bahá kind of set this process in motion, right? And in many ways, you know, Rosa Parks and those that came after and did this remarkable work, right?
Okay.
We're answering the call that Bahá'u'lláh, Abdu'l-Bahá sent forth into the world. So really, really beautiful. Yeah.
How did this film impact your views around America's spiritual destiny and the oneness of humanity and addressing race in America?
First of all, I think for me, he gave our nation a sense of hope. When he talks about America's spiritual destiny, and he did on many occasions, and towards the end of his visit, even he talked about that he had received much love from the American people, and that he views them as noble people. And I often thought about why was he so positive towards this country and Canada, and it, you know, this great experiment, this great American experiment, is truly one of the only places on earth that has it's a nation made up of indigenous and then immigrants, and I mean we're all from immigrants essentially, and it is a place that really demonstrates, you know, the potential for the oneness of mankind and the diversity of all the peoples. When he was in Chicago, he revealed a prayer for America. And he, you know, just part of it, he says, "Oh God, let this American democracy become glorious in spiritual degrees, even as it has aspired to material degrees, and render this just government victorious." He saw what later we saw in our nation's desire to be the first to help anywhere in the world when something would go bad. And you know, so to me it's very inspiring, and it gave me a sense of hope for the future of our country.
That quote, "I'm sitting in the shadow of a 38th generation Lakota medicine man," and that prayer at times is very difficult for me, because on one hand, Abdu'l-Bahá is calling us to the nobility that we could achieve. But when we think about render this just government victorious, and you think about what this government has done to the Lakota people, it's a crime against humanity, and there has been no justice. And still today, even in our government, for Native and Black brothers and sisters throughout this country, we still do not have justice. Not in our criminal justice system, not in housing, not in education, not in, you know, so we really are struggling. So I think Abdu'l-Bahá and revealing that prayer tells America what we could be, right?
Yes.
But not what we are. And the work that we have to be about is coming into what we could be instead of resting on who we have been. So maybe if both of you could answer what Abdu'l-Bahá means to you.
And can I just add a little something onto this question, if I may? I'm really interested, right? We talk about religious truth, and I'm always interested in religious truth that is relevant, right, to our current set of circumstances and what we're dealing with now. So in talking about what Abdu'l-Bahá means to you, I'm wondering if you can reflect on why Abdu'l-Bahá, why now, apart from the fact that it is the 100th anniversary of his passing. But what makes the life, the example of Abdu'l-Bahá relevant to the moment that we are in now?
For me, in the annals of religious history, we've never had a personage that was an example of what it meant to live the life of the prophet of God that has delivered a revelation to the planet. Muhammad and Christ and Buddha and all the messengers of God of the past didn't have such a personage to help us along. And for me, personally, Abdu'l-Bahá is, he speaks in practical terms. He gives practical examples in his writings, and that was really important to me, because the revelation of Baha'u'lláh and Baha'u'llah's writings is very deep and very mystical and wonderful and vast. And Abdu'l-Bahá, it puts into terms that everyday people can understand what his father said. So that's what he means to me.
Yeah, following that, I think for me, he's more than a role model. He's the link that connects us to the manifestation of God. And he brought the teachings in their very purest form. He was the best travel teacher we could imagine. And one thing he said was that he is always with us. So this is a spiritual mystery, how he can transcend time and space and be present whenever we think of him. There's that quote, "If the believers establish in a befitting manner union and harmony with spirit, tongue, heart, and body, suddenly they shall find Abdu'l-Bahá in their midst." So he's personally a comforter, a father figure, a person we can turn to at all times. And we found many drawn to him and to stories about him while we were working on the film and generally. But this emboldened us to talk more about the faith with other people. And a number of our extras are not Baha'is. I mean, we have lots of stories about that, how people were drawn to helping us with the film. But he tells us to forget ourselves and our human limitations. And he promises to us that the mercy of God is waiting to reinforce us. And he's unique. You know, we know that the Guardian, Shoghi Effendi, said, in the person of Abdu'l-Bahá, the incompatible characteristics of a human nature and superhuman knowledge and perfection have been blended and are completely harmonized. So again, this is a mystery to us because it's not our station to understand that. And yet he's always with us.
Wow, beautiful. Thank you so much. We want to take a look at the clip that, and if you all would maybe share one of the stories around this clip that we're going to see about the Alternative Banquet, because I had never actually heard this story before. So this was incredible for me to come across, because I was like, and the way that you've depicted it is phenomenal. So could you set that up for us and take us into it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So it was the final days of Abdu'l-Bahā's time in New York as he's getting ready to depart America. And the community wanted to hold a great banquet. And so they rented a banquet hall in the Great Northern Hotel in New York. And he found out from the proprietor that, when the proprietor found out that black people were coming, he said that, I mean, the proprietor said that they weren't allowed to come and in the hotel for this banquet. And that was, of course, very disturbing. But I think, as the scene depicts, that Abdu'l-Bahá went ahead and held the banquet anyway. And then the next night held a very special banquet for the people of color, And you'll see what happened in the scene. So.
And also at the banquet, he spoke passionately about the oneness of humanity. But when we were shooting the scene of the banquet, which we actually shot in California, we went to the Art Institute of San Francisco, which is my sister's school, to check out a light kit. And while we were there were all these students in the video cage. And I made this announcement, well, we need extras for a scene we're shooting in Berkeley tomorrow night. Does anyone want to come? And we can pay a little. So all these students were were suddenly interested in this. But Tim was very nervous because, well, it was a big group I announced it to, and some of them had tattoos all up on their necks and everything. And we were trying to picture these historic costumes on them. And any rate, the next night, a bunch of people arrived at the house. Now, Tim should tell the story about the lighting.
Yeah, well, so we're in a period home, a dining room, very beautiful home, and we have a lot of people getting into costume and makeup, and all the sets are being dressed, and everything is, it's amazing, and so a lot hinges on this evening. And so I open up this light kit that we have got from the Art Institute, and it's the first was, had 3 different size lights, and the largest light I set up and I clicked on it, and it all of a sudden it just the bulb just blew out, just bam. So I start looking through the kit, and I'm looking, and I said, did they put any spare bulbs in here? And no, there were no spare bulbs. So this light was no longer available. I had 3 lights, and so I put up the next one, which is a medium-sized light, and I click on it, and it doesn't even turn on at all. So now I'm down to one little light in this beautiful room to try to light this, and I'm thinking, well, this isn't good. And so I put up the little light, and sure enough, it works. And then Anne, in her wisdom, turns to some of these students that came from the Art Institute that were checking out gear at the same time we were. And she asked, does anybody have a light kit? And these students, whom I was a little nervous about showing up, actually said, yeah, we have a light kit. And they went out to their car and they brought in this light kit, and we were able to light this scene. And anyway, that was pretty embarrassing for me internally anyway, and thank God, it was Providence that they came that evening. So. Yes.
He learned to trust my intuition a little bit more.
Yeah, I did.
Well, and I think that ties back to what you were just talking about earlier, Anne, right? About how Abdu'l-Bahá is present. Like, really, like when we are working in this frame, in this avenue, towards this oneness, towards this healing, we are assisted, right? We don't understand it. It's a mystery of God, but we are assisted. And correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is you all, not all the time, but a lot of the time, went to places where Abdu'l-Bahá actually stayed and or spoke and filmed. Is that correct?
We went everywhere.
Yeah.
We went in America. And a couple of places we went after we had edited the film. So we actually have footage from a couple of places that we haven't put into the film.
Yeah. So I will just say that I found in my life that the things that I carry certain prejudices about, or certain uncomfortableness, which has to be born of something deeper, I find that I get thrust into those situations and I have to deal with it. And I think that evening was one of those cases. Yeah. So.
And for guests who may see this film and seeing a documentary that shows pictures and things of Abdu'l-Bahá, but there's no reenactment as far as Abdu'l-Bahá is concerned, could you explain why it is?
So like in Islam, where there's a prohibition actually about depicting the prophet because it's considered sort of profane to do so. In the Baha'i faith, like in Islam, there's guidance about the use of the images, and the guidance is that we would not portray the master. We wouldn't have an actor playing the part. So for example, when we first made a poster about our film that had his image. And the review board said, you can use it in certain situations, but you can't just put it up outside or something. You know, we have to be really reverent about it. So Tim designed something with a compass on it to symbolize Abdu'l-Bahá. So we had to work around things like that.
I think the first time I saw that actually used was in Ben-Hur. That method and the whole segment when Ben-Hur encounters Christ, and you don't see Christ, you just see the actor's reaction to, you know, who was supposed to be the personage of Christ. And it's very effective. I mean, when it's done, you know, well, I mean, it's a really, really moving way to portray the majesty and the glory of this personage, you know?
It did pose some challenges, and you're right. And I, early on, what was taught to me was the idea that I think, because I think Bahá'u'lláh expressed that it's not about the messenger, it's about the revelation, it's about the message from God, and it's about the light from the lamp, it's not about the lamp. And we see in the past, human nature is what it is, and so we've embellished the lamp and we put nice shades on it and bobblies and painted it, and until you can't really see the original lamp, and you can't even see the light coming from the lamp because of all the embellishments. So yeah, it is a challenge for Baha'is who are filmmakers to try to honor this guidance and tell the story of these amazing individuals. So
I really feel like you've done an incredible job. Thank
Absolutely.
you. Let's see that clip.
A farewell banquet was held on November 23rd at the Great Northern Hotel, attended by more than 300. The hall was regally decorated, the tables shone with crystal. But when the hotel proprietor realized that African Americans had been invited, he refused to allow them to come. Perhaps not wanting to disappoint all the other guests, Abdu'l-Bahá allowed the banquet to be held, but spoke passionately on the oneness of humanity. Abdu'l-Bahá arranged for a banquet for the African Americans the next night at the home of the Kinneys. Many white women came forward to cook for and serve the guests, showering them with love. In 1912, this was an unusual occasion, held before the Harlem Renaissance and long before the Civil Rights Movement. Abdu'l-Bahá said,
"Behold what an influence and effect the words of Bahá'u'lláh have had upon the hearts, that hating and shunning have been forgotten, that prejudices have been obliterated to such an extent that you arose to serve one another with great sincerity."
Mahmoud notes,
The Master's words made a great impression. The meeting demonstrated the power and influence of the cause in uniting in sincerity and love two races.
So before we get into questions and answers, I did want to say that, sorry, I'm a little touched by that scene. That this film couldn't be made without the help of a lot of people. We had hundreds of people involved who gave of their time and their resources. Yeah. So, so it's not just Ann and I that, yeah, you should see the credits when you go to YouTube. Look at the credits and you'll see kind of this massive list of everyone who was part of this project.
Yeah, the credits are 8 minutes long. And I remember when we first showed the film at the ABS conference, it was late at night in a very cold room. It was started at 10. So when the credits were rolling, people were rushing out of the room. They were tired, they were cold. And I was stupefied. I was like, you're not watching the credits? But I worked for a year on those credits. And well, not to mention all the people we wanted to acknowledge. So at any rate, those are just some personal things behind the scene.
Beautiful. And you know, and we know that obviously the filmmaking process is always collaborative, and you know, it'd be wonderful to be able to have everybody on here engaged in this conversation. Obviously, we'd be going on probably till midnight tonight, so so we can't do that. But no, I just I'm so moved. I was watching that. It remind me of John Coltrane's 1964 recording of A Love Supreme, which he did in one setting. He did not do any retakes. His wife said that when he went upstairs of their home into his workspace upstairs, when he came down with the finished composition, it was like Moses coming down from the mountain with the tablets.
Wow.
And I'm thinking about Abdu'l-Bahá coming to America, this example of the love supreme, and how that reverberates in our consciousness and in our spirit, and through his powerful example, and through John Coltrane's masterful composition. So thank you for collaborating with the other people that helped you in this process to create this this context that provides you know, a foreground for us and a format for us to really get a sense of the life of Abdu'l-Bahá while he was here in America. It's such a beautiful contribution. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. And Masud, we want to put you in our next film.
Well, we can talk about that another time, but sure, we'll talk, Ann. We'll talk.
You know, one of the things that was so incredible about that piece that we just watched is the example that each of us need to do when we see injustice, right? So if we take it back around to Bahá'u'lláh talking about the purpose of justice is the appearance of unity amongst man. And there was such an injustice that took place for those African-American friends. And Abdu'l-Bahá righted that injustice by the service. I mean, there's no way that there was any other room in 1912 that had white men and women serving African Americans.
Yeah.
You know,
It must have felt very unfamiliar. We talked about that with the actors before we started the scene, how this was before the Harlem Renaissance, and it must have been very strange for the people of color to be served and vice versa. You know, it was just socially a reversal.
Absolutely.
And that's what he calls us to do.
And can you imagine how that made those individuals feel?
Absolutely. And I'm sure all of those people, many of those people were Christian who were in the room at the time, right? Being served. And I'm sure they had read, you know, in the Bible about he who is least among you shall be first, you know, and to see that, you know, played out, you know, is a reaffirmation of faith, you know, and of prophecy, if you will, you know, here in this, you know, strange visitor from the East, dressed in this clothing that most people hadn't encountered before. And they're seeing, you know, him being the catalyst for this this prophetic voice to manifest itself. It's extraordinary. I can't, it's the first time I saw that scene, it was really moving for me because there's just something, again, this all goes back to being seen and being acknowledged, you know. And I think about my ancestors and who were enslaved people. And I think about my father growing up during Jim Crow. You know, my great grandfather, who was the son of an enslaved person on the island of St. Croix. And imagine them sitting down at a table where they are being served by the sons and daughters of people who used to own their ancestors. What an extraordinary, you know, transformative experience that must have been. So thank you for depicting that the way you did. It's very, very powerful.
Well, one quote, if I could share one quote, to Louis Gregory, Abdu'l-Bahá said, "I liken you to the pupil of the eye. You are black, and it is black, yet it becomes the focus of light." And then he later wrote of him, "Although being a black color, yet he shone as a bright light in the meeting of the friends." And then he advised an American friend, "You, the white people, should honor and welcome this shining colored man in such a way that all the people will be astonished." So he called upon us not just to be allies, but to really love. And he gave this positive image to those of color and about the role that they would play in society and in the building of this great new world order.
Yeah, it's such a wonderful point. Yeah. Yeah, it makes me feel like as Baha'is, right, with this revelation that we can't lead from the rear. We have to be at the foreground of this work, at the forefront of this work. We have to really lead by example and seize every opportunity that we can to demonstrate the power of unity through diversity, the power of the reality of our shared oneness and our equality. So that's, wow. It's good stuff, man. It's good stuff.
So one of the questions that has come in is, how can we purchase the film?
Well, it is available for sale through 9starmedia.com. And I believe that BDS may still have some copies, but we've also put it all free on YouTube. Just put in YouTube, Luminous Journey official channel. And the whole film should come up, and the film can be viewed in two parts. Some communities have been showing it in two parts on 2 consecutive nights. And we've been asked to come sometimes and introduce it or answer questions. We'd love to do that for more communities. And that's a great way to continue the dialogue. And another way to view it is simply to pull out scenes like we've done today that highlight certain principles. And so that's also possible. And then you can also watch behind the scenes videos. We have a number of those, and it shows.
You got outtakes, you got bloopers. You got bloopers? I want to see some bloopers.
So if I wanted to take a month and every day learn a little something new about Abdu'l-Bahá, that might also be another way to view the film?
You could.
One of our new friends of the faith in South Florida, Amelia Rose, hello, good to see you here. She said, "I was transfixed when I watched it. Never would have sat through any movie for this long without pain and suffering." Well done.
The length is a problem, because at first we were trying to submit it to film festivals and such, and 2.5 hours was a bit long for many of the festivals. So we kind of gave up on that. But the script I originally wrote for the film would have been for about an 8-hour film, and I had to keep cutting. So there's many stories we couldn't include, but we did our best, and we learned from doing it. We're making a film now about Abdu'l-Bahá in France, and we hope it will be about an hour long. We're not sure yet, but we're working on it.
Yeah.
And is there a way, for Baha'is around the world, this year, 2021, marks the 100th year since his passing. So is there a way, if Baha'i communities wanted to show it in the big screen, like I saw someone's comment, God willing, this film will be put on the big screen in America, but if a Baha'i community wanted to show it in a theater and invite people, can that be done?
It can be. We did some early screenings just after the film was released in some of our. Well, we screened it at the Wilmette Theater in Chicago, or in Wilmette, Illinois, on a large screen. It really requires, though, that you have a high-def DVD.
I wanted to address the language question because Nan Ackerman asked about it, and about French particularly. And Canada actually just took the Montreal section and added French subtitles, and it's up on the National Canadian website. So that's a start. But we would love to see it in French and in other languages. And so far, sort of through work coordinating with people, it's been in Chinese with subtitles, Armenian, Turkish, and Persian. And those versions are on YouTube. And then the Italian version was just done. And how we did that is that we sent a hard drive with all of the scenes, and Tim had taken off the narrative in English, leaving the music, and he took off the text in English, so that then the Italians did a beautiful version using all that source material.
Whoever is wanting to produce another language version of it, we do have a hard drive that we can ship out that will have, you know, it ready for them to just put their language in and put their titles in.
Masud, you get the final word.
Well, I mean, I don't know what else to say. I mean, it's, you know, what an extraordinary gift, as I've said before. I want to thank you all for the work that you all have put into it, along with your colleagues and the people that you worked with. Just really just a wonderful contribution. And, you know, I learned some really wonderful things. You know, I've been a Baha'i since 1992, and I have a working man's knowledge of the life of Abdu'l-Bahá, you know. But it's wonderful to see these vignettes and to learn fresh, you know, gems, to learn about fresh stories and people that connected with the master. And I think, you know, it's such a powerful contribution to where we are in the moment, and all of the challenges that we're dealing with, to be able to turn to the example and a message of Abdu'l-Bahá, and to not to feel some of that sense of despair and that sense of futility lifted as a result of coming in contact with his life and his example. So I just want to celebrate the contribution you all made along with your team, and thank you so much.